Welcome to the HMO Property Show, by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Hey guys, welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host Neil Gibb, and today we're going to be talking about manufactured growth strategies, because as we know, income is the outcome that we want to achieve, as in we want to have a portfolio that creates enough passive income so that we don't have to do anything if we don't want to. However, not everybody is in the position to invest $150,000 to $200,000 into a high cash flow positive HMO. So what we can do before this is we can do what are called chunk deals or manufactured growth strategy deals, where you buy a property and you force value on it by improving its improving what it is. So examples, we can do renovations, subdivisions, developments. And what I'm going to do in this podcast, I'm going to take you through the different strategies that are out there and talk about the ones that I've implemented, because even though I did get myself in a position where I don't need to work because I've got enough income coming in from my portfolio, I absolutely love manufactured growth strategies. They are addictive because they continue to create chunks of money every time you do one. So if you can do a renovation in 4 weeks and make $30,000, $40,000, then I'm pretty sure that's better going to work for 40 hours a week and only getting paid $100,000 for the full year's work. And it can all be so much more rewarding as well when you see the fact that you renovate a property and then you put a young couple in there or a family in there that don't have the skills required to bring that property up to the condition that you have with your skill set. Then it's incredibly rewarding and you get paid in line with that reward as well. And you obviously take risk when you do these things, but it's a calculated risk because you can do due diligence previously to know that if you buy this property for this much and you spend this much money in the way of a manufactured growth strategy, you also know what that property is worth in the market at the back end, and you can calculate your profit before you even get yourself into the deal. So, like I say, I love these things. I still do them now. Am I going to do them forever? Probably not. But when I get to 50-year-olds, I want to be in a position where I don't even have to get out of bed if I don't want to. And that comes from also having like all the things that I want in my life and being able to travel as and when I want to. But I've also put in the hard yards now so that at 40, 50-year-old, well, I'm 40 now, but at 50-year-old, I can do whatever I want. And it's a good feeling when I walk away from Woodside and I had $110,000 a year of cash flow coming in. But I want $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year cash flow coming in. That's my target because I want to travel a lot. I want my kids to travel a lot, and I want to spend more time with my wife and my family. So, manufactured growth strategies. Number 1, top of my slides. Renovations. Everybody loves a good renovation. Now, it's generally the stepping stone into forcing value on properties. And by the way, you don't just have to do manufactured growth strategies to sell. You can buy these things. Let's say you buy a property for $350,000. You spend $40,000 on it through a renovation and you get it revalued at $420,000, $430,000. Instead of selling that property, you can actually redraw that equity back out and then move into another property as well. So it's called buy, renovate, refinance. But the renovation is such a great tool. You can do them really fast if you do them well, if you've got the right structures in place and the right systems in place. But you can also do them wrong and you can lose money, and you can renovate not to the market. So generally when you're doing chunk deals, manufactured growth strategies to sell on again, you want to be selling into what we call the bell curve of the market. So in every market, they have a low end of the market and they have a high end of the market, and then they have the midpoint of the market, which is generally called the median. So what you want to be doing as a developer or a renovator, you want to be buying at the low end of the market and you want to be selling it to the middle of the market, because that's where the most transactions are done. If you can get it to the high end, that's great, but you do not want to try and target, you don't want to try and break suburb records by trying to get the highest price possible in that market. You don't want to over renovate it and over spec it, because then people that are looking in that suburb might not be able to afford it. So you want to be like just over mid, and that would be absolutely perfect. And again, you can find all these stats out on realestate.com. But there's essentially 3 different styles of renovation. There's cosmetic, and these are generally a lick of paint, some fresh carpets. You leave the old kitchens and bathrooms in, and you just do a good tidy up. You just make the house look new again. Now, we've done a few of these. Nice and easy, nice and fast. You can do them in 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how good your team is and how organised you are. And I've seen people make some really good money on these things as well, like over $100,000 for a quick renovation. You make your money in the buy, so you know that when you bought that property, you've got it for a cracking price, and you also know that when you spend X amount of money in the way of a renovation, you're going to be able to sell it and make a tidy profit on the back end. Then after cosmetic, we've got partial renovations. These are kitchens and or bathrooms. And generally when you're getting into partial renovations, you need to go to council and get a build permit, because in Western Australia, any contract value over $20,000 needs to be done by a licensed builder or a registered builder, and you need to get a build permit from council for that too. If you're just doing paint and changing carpet, you generally don't need that. But if you are taking bathrooms out and installing new bathrooms, you need to get them re-waterproofed, then you generally need to go through build permit, lodge that with council, and council give you permission to do the work. And I'll touch briefly on this in a second as well. But last but not least, this is generally where the big money's made when you're doing structural renovations. And this is when you buy a 3-bedroom house and change it to a 4-bedroom house, or you buy a 2-bedroom house and change it to a 3-bedroom house. You're changing the floor plan, you're taking walls out, you're putting walls in, or you're building an extension to that property again. So they're the 3 different levels, 3 different skill sets required. Obviously, some of that's doing taking walls down and changing the floor plan of a property is going to need a totally different skill set to somebody that's doing a bit of painting and changing some carpets. Make sure that you get 3 quotes for each job that you want to get out there. And if you are doing something like a structural or a kitchen renovation, make sure that you're getting quality trades in, and make sure you look after your trades as well. That's the big one. If you turn up at that house on a morning and all the guys are there, all the tradies are there doing their thing, and you turn up with coffees for everybody, guess what? They're going to come back and want to do more work for you because you look after them, and make sure you pay them on time as well, but only when the work's done. So I'm going to take you quickly through the process if you need to go through partial renovation or structural renovation. So first of all, if you're going to change the floor plan of a property, what you need to do is you need to get a drafty in, or a draftsman, or a draftswoman, or a draft person. And what they will do, they'll draft up what the old floor plan looks like, and then they'll draft up what the new floor plan looks like, and they'll also draft up what the alterations are as well. So if you put bathrooms in or en-suites in, they will show on that plan the size of the ensuite, or the size of the bathroom, or the size of the kitchen, and basically all the detail for the work as well. And then what you'll do with that work, you can either take that direct to council to get it approved, but that's not the best way to do it in my eyes. What we do personally is we engage a private building surveyor. These people work for themselves. They don't work direct for the council. You pay them a fee. They will give your design what's called a CDC, and that's a Certificate of Design Compliance, and they will fill out what's called a BA3 document, and you lodge your excuse me. What they will do is they will stamp the plans that you've got from the drafty to say that they meet the National Construction Code. They will also give you some extra information to say that you must do X, Y, and Z to make this meet the code. And then you lodge that along with your BA3 and your CDC and your stamp plans to council for a 10-day approval, 10 business day approval. Once council approve it, they will give you a permit, which is a permit is essentially permit. They permit you to do the work. And that permit will remain open in the council office until you finish your work. Once you've finished your work, you will then use what's called a BA7, or a notice of completion, and you lodge that with council when you finish your work, and then council will close that permit off, which means all work has been complete. So I hope that makes sense. Not a lot of people know about that system or that process, so I hope that really helps. Next, we've got subdivisions. So we've done plenty of subdivisions, made some good money on them. they are getting harder and harder to find, especially in a hot market, because what you find is people start overpaying for them because they just get FOMO, fear of missing out. And as enticing as it is to get into a deal, and as desperate as you might feel to get into a deal, what you don't want to do is overpay, because as we've already said, you make your money in the deal. You make your money in the buy, in the deal. You make your money in the buy. So you don't want to overpay, because your subdivision is still going to cost the same amount of money, and your sale price is still going to cost the same amount of money, or the sale price is still going to be the same. So it's your skills as a developer to negotiate well on the buy, because the better you can negotiate and the better price you can get, the more money you're going to make at the back end of the project. So we've got our standard splitters or battle axe subdivisions. This is basically a house behind a house, where you generally retain the front house, subdivide the back off, and it's called the battle axe because it's got the long skinny driveway, and then it's got the big battle axe head at the back of the block there. And these are quite good. You can renovate the front house. A few things that you need to look out for: if you are subdividing the back off and retaining the front house, then you will need to renovate or bring that property up to the requirements of the residential design codes, which is also the R codes, as you may know them. And we've got them just at the top there, 7.3 residential design codes, volume 1. This is going to change soon, so we'll probably do another podcast when it does change. But right now, that's what it is as of August 2022. And when you have to bring that front house up to the code, then you may need to add in a 4 square meter storeroom. You may need off-street parking. There might be many things that property did not meet when it was built, but now needs to meet, because you are essentially changing that block of land, or you are upgrading that property, and council will make you bring it up to the standard required. Alternatively, you can knock that whole old house down and still do one house behind the other and just put 2 new houses on there. That would, in my experience, would not be as profitable, because the front house has always got value. And if you, for instance, that property's worth, $350,000 after you've subdivided the back off, you spend $50,000 on it and then sell it for $400,000. That's better than knocking that house down, because you've essentially lost $350,000, and then you have to spend another $250,000 or $300,000 to build a new house there as well. So we find that when you're doing a subdivision, if you can retain the existing house and upgrade it, that is the sweet spot for these things as well. Now, you can always do a battle axe subdivision and build a HMO on the back, so that you've got a high cash flow asset on the back, but you've got the land for a lower value. And then you can just renovate the front house and sell that into the market just to a normal mum and dad owner or investor. What's becoming more and more popular nowadays in Perth is the side-by-side duplex. The benefit of these things is you're maximising the site area. There's no common property driveway required, because both houses are street facing. You will need another crossover, and the crossover is a section of land in between the road to the block, and that is generally council land. So the council will have a crossover specification, which means you need to build that crossover to the specification required. Every council is different. If you're going to do a subdivision, then it's best off to start digging into the council database of documents, or if you're really getting stuck, you can ring the duty planner and just say, "Hey, Mr. Duty Planner, I've been scouring through your website for a while and I can't find the information I'm looking for. Could you possibly point me in the right direction, please, for your crossover specification?" The other good thing about these is they're both street facing, but the negative that I see about side-by-side duplexes is they generally have skinny frontages, because if you've got a 20 metre frontage and you're cutting that into 2, then all of a sudden you've just got 2 10-metre frontages, and can be tricky to design long skinny houses. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but because it's long and skinny, it means that you lose a lot of natural light going into them houses as well. So it's a bit more design work for the designer, and they're also a little bit more expensive to build than a standard square house. Corner blocks, everybody loves a corner block. If you can get corner blocks, there's some good concessions that you can get from the council or from government. And alongside the Residential Design Code Volume 1, there's another document called DCP 2.2. And DCP 2.2 allows you to, gives you information regarding truncations and adding truncations back onto your minimum lot size required for you to build properties. I'm not going to dig into it too far. I'm definitely not an expert on DCP 2.2. I'm the type of person that surrounds myself with experts and gets the information from them. Excuse me. But corner blocks are good. And corner blocks are good because you can end up with 2 street frontages. Again, you don't need any common property driveway, so you can maximise the site area. And all of your properties can be street facing, and all of them can have good frontages as well. So everybody loves corner blocks. When they're available on the market, they don't last long. And what I've seen in the last 12 to 18 months is people are paying well and truly above market price for them because they're seeing the movement that the market's going to have in it. And they're buying now for over what it should cost to buy it. They're going to sit on that deal for 2-3 years, and then they're going to develop it once it's worth what it's worth. Good way to do it. And then it starts getting a bit more complex. We've got developments and construction. So this is when we essentially force value upon that block of land by using it to its fullest potential. So council or state and federal governments have put density bonuses to local governments and said you need to increase the density within your shire because we're sick of urban sprawl. And urban sprawl means that we're getting further and further out from centre points. And when you look at a map of Perth from a bird's eye view and you see how far it's spread from Butler in the north to Port Kennedy in the south, we're spread so far. And what the councils and the governments are trying to do now is increase the density closer to the CBD, because a CBD should be a thriving hub of activity. It should have people working there day and night. It should have high density, lots of people in and around the CBD, restaurants, bars, stuff like that. But midweek, Perth can be a bit of a quiet place because people need to travel so long to get back home. So what's happening now is, as you get closer to the CBD, new blocks becoming smaller, which again it's forced upon by councils and governments, which means the developers have to get creative, especially with the new code that's coming out. There's going to be a lot of deep soil retention zones, which means we're going to have a lot more trees that we need to incorporate onto these sites as well, which also need to be internal to the minimum lot size. So if you've got 180 square metre minimum lot, you're going to have to find a space to plant a tree on that lot, and it's going to have a specific square meterage that you need to allocate to that. And for a much better explanation on this, I'm going to bring in one of my town planners, and we're going to get the full lowdown from her on that. So keep an eye on the website, keep an eye on the podcast, because we're going to be bringing her in soon. So when it comes to developments, we've got what's called the R codes, and you can look at your block and find out what R code it's actually got. If you live in any council, they have a mapping system, and you can go online and type in, for instance, I'm just going to use this one for an example. You can type in Victoria Park and then type in Intramaps, Intramaps, Intramaps. Intramaps is an electronic mapping system. You can then drill down and type in your address. What it will do, the Intramap will focus down on your address. Excuse me. And from there, you can find out things like what day my bin needs to be put out or what day it's collected. You can look at overlays. You can look at contour lines to see the actual ups and downs or the heights of roads and land, which is quite handy when you're a developer, because we prefer to develop flat square blocks instead of hilly circular blocks. Plenty of them out there. And more importantly as well, Intramaps also indicates the zoning of your land. And the higher the number of the zoning equals the higher density that block can have. So, for instance, you'll see a lot of R5 land, which is farmland, which means I think the minimum square meterage on that is like 2,000 square meters. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got R60, R80, R100. R60, 80 and 100 are generally apartments, but you can also build single houses or group dwellings on R60 as well, depending on what the local planning policy states. So if you drill down and find out that you live on a 1,000 square metre block and it's zoned R40, then you've got the potential to put 4 units on that site. subject to council approval, of course. And that means that your site can be developed, and that could also be a very interesting purchase to a developer. Now, we've done a lot of deals where we've dealt direct with the owner of a block of land, and we haven't had an agent there. And I believe we can create real good win-win outcomes there as well, because we can pay the vendor a little bit more in exchange for time. Sometimes when there's a real estate agent involved, the real estate agent wants their commission and they really want to push the deal through, and they don't really get the terms required for the developer and also for the land seller as well. So nothing against real estate agents. I absolutely love them. They're an integral part of what we do. Personally, I just prefer to deal direct with the sellers. So I'm going to take you through the different types of development and construction that you can do right now. So you've got single houses, which is essentially a single house which stands on its own green title or survey strata lot. It's one house on one lot, whether it is green title or survey strata. They're easy to fund from the banks. The banks love them because there's heaps of them out there. There's heaps of them to compare them to. And if you ever do default on your mortgage, the bank feels comfortable in the fact that they could probably sell that to somebody else quite easily. Relatively easy to build as well. Single stories do not need to go through DA, which is development approval. Some double stories don't as well. It all depends on the council. You also don't need to subdivide the block. So in a nutshell, if you find a vacant block of land and you think I can buy that for $500,000 and build on it for $350,000, but I can sell it for $900,000, there's essentially a nice bit of profit in there, and all you've had to do is buy the land and build on it, and you could probably do that from end to end in about 12 months. That includes applying for finance too. Double story could be different, but I'm talking single story there. After your single houses, you've got grouped dwellings, and grouped dwellings is one or two on the same lot. And it's essentially a one or a two subdivision, but you're not just doing the subdivision, you're actually building on the back as well. And when you go 3 units or more, you generally have to go through development approval, because council want to know what you were building on them lots, just to make sure that it's going to fit the R code and also what the council requires for that lot too. You're also going to need to go through WAPC. Now, WAPC is a Western Australian Planning Commission. The Western Australian Planning Commission basically look after subdivisions, so the actual land creation, and the local shires and the local governments and the local councils, they look after the actual built form that goes on that subdivision when it goes through. So when you're doing a multi-unit development or a group dwelling development, you'll need to lodge 2 documents. You'll need to get your land surveyed, and you'll need to get a survey strata plan drawn up and lodge that with WAPC. That generally takes 90 days for approval. And then you'll also need to get your houses drawn up and lodge them with council and get development approval. That generally takes 60 days. Now, if you're trying to be a little bit creative and your houses are not deemed to comply, and we'll dig into this a little bit more with the town planner, but if the house designs are not deemed to comply and they need to go through DA, what we've done in the past is we lodge development application first to make sure that the council will let us build what we need to build on there. And then once we got DA, we'll then lodge WAPC, and we'll get the WAPC approval whilst we're building the houses. So we'd build them all on one line on one title, and then as we're coming to completion, we'll subdivide them and create the new lots so we can sell them individually. 2 to 3 units, you can generally, and this is general in nature, you can generally finance these with normal residential lending, which means you can go to like the Big Four, for instance, and you can get really good rates, and you don't need any pre-sales, because you can say to the bank, look, I want to develop this for myself, and I want to keep all 3 units for myself in my own portfolio. And the likes of Westpac, ANZ, Combank, and even some of the second-tier lenders like Bank of Queensland, Bank West, they would lend you the money to do this, as long as they can see the value in the back end is going to stack up for them. And then when you're going to build 4 units or more, you generally fall into the commercial lending space. Now, we spoke about this with Elizabeth Rutten on episode 2, and it's a very different ball game within this lending space, and deposits required are different, interest rates are totally different, the lending landscape in this area is totally different. So if you are going to do a development, personally I would say start off on a 2 or a 3 unit site first, because once you get into the commercial lending landscape, if you don't get it right, it can be very expensive and it can also be very ruthless as well. So if you are going to try and build, I would personally start on a 1 into 2 subdivision and build on the back. And, you know, for that, if that's your first deal and you make some good money on it, even if you make 50 grand profit, I'd say congratulations, you made 50 grand profit, but you've also just learned how to do a subdivision, lodge documents with WAPC, and also construct on the back of a property as well. So for me, that would be a really good deal. And then that could be the platform for you to then go out and do a 1 into 3, a 1 into 4, 5 unit development, or what we're going to talk about now is apartments. And apartments I've never built, and my business partner has done apartments all over Western Australia, all over Perth. Very, very experienced in this space. But the Residential Design Code Volume 2 is for apartments. And these all used to be in one document together. Now it's all changed. So apartments are also referred to as multiple dwellings, is a dwelling in a group of more than one dwelling on a lot where any part of the plot ratio area of a dwelling is vertically above any part of the plot ratio area of another. But it's not a group dwelling or a dwelling above the ground floor in a mixed-use development. So essentially, it means if you've got one dwelling above another at any part thereof, it could even be just the storeroom, then that would essentially be classed as multiple dwellings or apartments. Now, again, it's not something that I've done, so I'm not going to try and waffle on about it and pretend that I'm an expert in that area, because I'm definitely not. But I will definitely bring on some people to talk about apartment construction, apartment due diligence, how to actually fund these things, how to get the pre-sales on them, and how to actually make some really good profit on the back end of them. Now, I've spoke about the different ways that we can actually manufacture growth or force growth or make chunk deals. But there's also some really interesting ways and creative ways that you can buy property, control property, structure deals with property. And again, everybody's situation will be different, but I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've done. Because the traditional way is save up, work hard, save up, buy a property and put down a 10 or a 20% deposit. And then generally you wait for the market to go up in value, and then you redraw some of that equity to put into more properties. That's just waiting and letting the market do its own thing. But as developers and as renovators or subdividers or builders, we don't want to wait for the market to do its thing. We want to force value on these things so we can move faster, so we can make money faster. But sometimes the way we lend money can also slow us down. So we've been tied up on projects before with our serviceability side of things on big developments. And what we've had to do is get creative, and we've had to do joint ventures with landowners so that we could joint venture with them to subdivide their land and then make some money in the meantime whilst we're waiting for some of the bigger projects to go on. So what we do is we do things we call OPM and OPP. OPM is other people's money, and OPP is other people's property. Now, before you run out there and start putting these things together, there's a lot to consider. You've got to make sure that you're confident in your abilities to deliver whatever strategy you choose to execute. But with joint ventures, you also want a joint venture with somebody that's got a totally different skill set or strength to you. Now, when we go into joint ventures, we generally get people to put the capital in, and we give them a percentage return on that investment in the deal over a set amount of time. And then we, as the developer, we bring the site, the energy and the skills to that deal. And then we structure the deal in accordance to that. So if someone's just putting the money, we generally pay them a percentage return. We execute the deal, we sell it down, and we pay that investor back their original investment with their agreed return on investment on there as well. So it can be quite good for people if they've got money to invest, but they don't want to tie it up for too long, or they've got money to invest and it's not enough to invest in a long-term buy and hold. So they might use their money to invest in our projects to help build up their cash buffer or their cash reserve, so that they can then go and invest in a HMO later down the line. Remember, strengths and weaknesses, that's essentially where you want to be. you want to make sure that you both bring something different to the party. There's no point both of you being the delivery parties or the action partners, or there's no point both of you being the cash partners. You want to make sure that your joint venture is structured so that you've got different people in the deal and you can all create a win-win scenario. Now, there's a few different ways that we can actually control property, and I'm going to bring in somebody else to talk about this in more detail later down the line, but we've used what's called call options. And call options gives you the option to buy a property for an agreed price, but you don't have to buy it. Now, call options are getting more and more harder to get across the line because there's a few people out there teaching them, which means a few people have gone out there and signed call options, but then they've tied the property up for 12, 18 months and never really done anything with it. So they are really tricky to get across the line nowadays. Not impossible, but there's a certain skill set required. So a call option gives you the option to buy the property, but not the obligation to buy it as well. So you can cover it with the call option, speak to council, put some money into it and maybe get some plans drawn up and get some feedback from a town planner or from council and say, can we do this to this property? And if council or the town planner say no, then you can go back to the seller and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Seller, council won't let us do what we can do. We're going to back out the deal. This means that you haven't had to put a lot of money down. And it also means you've got it out, because I'd much rather pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to get myself into a deal like that and then realise it doesn't work and be able to get myself back out of it than putting down $150,000, $200,000 and getting a bank loan, settling on the property and then finding out that you can't do what you want to do with it, because that's a totally different ball game. You are then tied in and you purchase what we call in the game as a lemon. A lemon is something that you can't do what you thought you could do. Tastes pretty sour. Lease options, they're very similar to call options. A lease option would be you have a lease agreement in place with an option to purchase at the back end of that lease. These can be quite good if, for instance, you want to buy a property, but you haven't got the serviceability yet, or you haven't got all the money yet, and you can agree to, like I say, lease it for market rent or even more, and then with the option to buy it at the back end as well. Owner joint ventures are quite good, really untapped part of the market for me. We've done a few owner joint ventures now, been really good. We've done renovation owner joint ventures. We've done subdivision owner joint ventures. We've done deals where we've done an owner joint venture where the owner has put his land into the deal. And then we've also got a cash partner, joint venture partner, to put the capital into the deal. And we, as the HMO Property Go, just facilitated that deal. So we didn't own the property, we didn't have any money on it, but we made some really good money on the back end of it because of the skill set that we brought to the table. And that was a real win-win outcome for everybody involved, because the seller got more money for the property themselves because we didn't have to buy it, we didn't have to pay a stamp duty, we didn't have to do X, Y, or Z. The investor had some money that they wanted to invest into something and get a much higher return than they would do leaving their money in the bank. And we got to make some really good money on the back end by bringing our skill set to the table. Owner joint ventures are really good. If I can give you a tip, when you're negotiating on these things, don't talk about the outcome for you, talk about the outcome for them. If I partner with you, Mr. Property Owner, I will be able to give you the money that you want for your property. However, I just need some time to actually execute what I need to do. And then give some evidence to say, look, when the property is renovated or once it's subdivided, it will sell for this. But I'm also going to have to commit X amount of $1,000 to this deal to make it work, which means that if you give me 12 months to execute this strategy, I can pay you the money that you want for this property or this deal. Delayed settlements are quite good as well. Again, getting a little bit harder to get into nowadays, but you can essentially... once you've got your finance approved, let's say you've got a 28 days finance, typically 28 days finance and then 28 days settlement. What you can do on the back of that, you can delay settlement and also ask for, I've gone totally blank. It is access prior to settlement or prior possession. So once your finance is approved and the deal's gone unconditional, what you can do, and you need to negotiate this up front before you actually settle on the property, is you can get access to the property once finance is approved, potentially renovate that property before you even settle, which means you'll have no holding costs because you haven't settled on it yet and the bank haven't started charging you interest. And then on the day that you settle, you could potentially put that back on the market again. Now, that just means you need to ask for a longer settlement period. Instead of 28 days, you might ask for 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is. Alternatively, you can use a call option, and that way you don't need to purchase the property, don't need to pay stamp duty. And then you've got one of the things that we used really well in the early days. It's called the lease and sublease, or rent-to-rent, or head lease. And this can be used on HMO or Airbnb. A lot of people do it in the Airbnb space as well. And this is essentially where you lease the property from somebody with permission to then release that back out. So what we used to do is we'd look for 5 or 6 bedroom houses that we could rent for $500 or $600 a week. And then we'd make sure that we could rent them rooms out for, let's say, $250 a week, and then keep the profit in between what you rent it out for and what you pay to that other person. So for instance, we had a 6 bedroom, 6 bathroom head lease in Fremantle. We used to rent that from the owner for $750 a week, but we rented 6 rooms out for $250 a week, which means we rented out for $1,500 a week. We had to pay the owner $750 a week, and then we kept the profit in between that. So quite a good outcome. I think we made like $28,000, $29,000 a year cash flow from that deal, and we didn't even own it. So if your plan is to get yourself out of work as soon as possible, but you don't have a great amount of capital to do it, then rent-to-rent, head lease, lease and sublease could be a really good strategy for you, whether you go down HMO or Airbnb route. Because the more time you have available to do deals, the more creative you can get, and then you can get out there and start speaking to people about call options, joint ventures, owner joint ventures, and when you've got time to execute these deals, become really, really lucrative for you, and you can make some really good money. And that's what it's all about. We want to use real estate as the vehicle to build wealth, and essentially we can sit back and let the market do its thing, or we can sit there and we can do our thing to beat the market by forcing growth on these properties through manufactured growth strategies. So I hope that helps, guys. I'm going to leave you with this. We need to renovate and meet the needs of the market. We want to make sure that we are selling into the market in the bell curve. I touched on this earlier, but you also want to make sure that you're selling to meet the market itself. So before you get into any of these manufactured growth strategies, you want to speak to at least 3 to 5 agents in these areas and say, Mr. Agent, if I can bring you the best property for you to sell right now, what would it be and why? And you could also say, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, I'm going to buy this property over here. What would you recommend I do to it so that it makes it incredibly easy for you to sell for the best price possible? Because we want to be renovating, developing and building to the owner-occupier, because that's the biggest market. Unless you're looking to hold these things, and obviously you want to be renovating to HMO and holding it, or you want to be renovating to HMO, sorry, not renovating, you want to be constructing to HMO and keeping it. And this is what I'm going to leave you with. Didn't realise I had that last slide there, but once you get out there and you start doing these things, you might be nervous right now. You might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. There's once you start to see opportunity, there's so many opportunities out there, but you're not going to be perfect at these things when you first start out. We're still not perfect. We still learn a lot on every single deal we do. What I will say to you is, when things do go wrong, don't beat yourself up. See it as a lesson and take that lesson into your next deal. Because every master was once a disaster and every winner was once a beginner.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates. Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.